Welcome everybody again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that's profiling the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring future creation. And for all those that like really great stories, I'm Ira Pastor. I'm your health, aging, and longevity ambassador along for this journey. So for the last several shows, we have spent a lot of time at what we'll refer to as the different hierarchical levels of health and wellness. We've spent time talking about our bodies and spending a lot of time at sort of the very small level. Our genes, our proteins, our cells, studying all of the sort of the intricate biologic processes that are going on behind the scenes that keep us healthy and ultimately, unfortunately, lead towards our transition towards disease. And, we've also ventured a bit beyond the human organism itself, as we've talked about the importance of our immediate microenvironment, the importance of the human connection with other parts of this biosphere that we live in. We've talked about the importance of the human connection to animals. We've talked about the importance of our connection with insects and microbes. We also had a recent discussion on the importance of trees in sort of nature in a broader context. But just like our need to take care of our bodies and, the discussions we've had around all forms of regenerative medicine, we also have a responsibility to take care of our immediate environment for the purposes of our survival, to develop what I sort of refer to as regenerative ecology. And while we may hear things in the press about, so-called blue zones, these tiny, pristine, isolated communities with populations with exceptional health and longevity, it's estimated that, by the year 2050, around 70% of the global population will be living in cities. So we need to come up with better solutions for people to ensure our continued existence and vitality in these environments. And so today we have a really fascinating guest that I'm really thrilled is joining us, who's at the epicenter of these activities. And he's going to take us further along this theme into the future. And that is Scott Quitel. Scott is the founder of the Land Health Institute, and he is also a director of social entrepreneurship, assistant teaching professor at the Close School of Entrepreneurship at Drexel University here in Philadelphia. His Land Health Institute is a Philadelphia nonprofit whose core mission is basically to put nature back through exploration, through environmental education, and ultimately community-based land revitalization. And its core philosophy is basically grounded in this belief that healthy land, healthy environment is extremely important and is the root of human health and healthy communities. The Land Health Institute aims to build environmental awareness and appreciation while enhancing environmental, social, and economic vitality of the city here in Philadelphia. Scott holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University, where he did his honors thesis on the rebirth of the Providence waterfront. He has an MBA from Temple University and a law degree from Temple University. He has extensive experience in horticulture, geology, soil science, ecological land-based planning, ecological restoration, and landscape design and construction. And as we've discussed on previous shows about the importance of sort of getting out in nature, Scott is an extremely prolific provider of a variety of services, educational ecology, and design-oriented tours and hikes, which he leads for peoples of all ages in various natural areas in and around Philadelphia. So all that being said, Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, thank you, Ira.
So we typically start the show off by just giving our guests the floor to basically talk about you, who you are, where you grew up, your background, how you got interested in law and business, in ecology and science, and ultimately how you find yourself today at sort of this really exciting epicenter of, what I said, recall regenerative ecology.
Okay. I have gotten to where I am today through like a pretty circuitous path. So, I'm the product of somebody who didn't necessarily know what he wanted to be when he grew up, and hence I got experience in various places like the business environment, law environment. My true love ended up and has always really been in and around nature. Just took me a bunch of years to like turn that into career-based activity. So but if you're asking on background, the most formative time in my life in a lot of different ways took place probably when I was like 3 to 6 years old. I'm a Philly guy. I was born in West Philly, and in fact, not too far from Fairmount Park, across the street from Overbrook High School. And but when I was about 2 or so, my dad took a position in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and we're talking, second half of the 60s. And back then, Allentown was not the 3rd largest city in Pennsylvania. It was this rural place, not connected to New York City and other places by interstates. And so we ended up in this little place called the Drexel Park Apartments, real tiny development, surrounded by, like the name says, a park, and then also just open fields and cornfields and things like that. And back then in the 60s, maybe it was perceived to be safer. Maybe it was a product of having young parents who really didn't worry about things that maybe you, Ira, and I worry about with our kids today. So while other boys were kind of playing cowboys and Indians and games like that, when we lived there, I found my way into the park. I found my way into the creek. I found my way into the forest. I found my way into the fields. And for like 3 years or so, I compiled these vivid memories that to this day live in me as if they were yesterday. And I can remember like where I found my first snake and where I found my first turtle, and the first major time that I fell into the creek and had to get some mean old lady to help me out, and going back home, and my mom, telling me to take my clothes off and throwing them in the pink sink that we had because it was the 60s, and me like being amazed and saying, "Look, Mom, there's a daddy long legs crawling on my wet clothes here." But basically, I have these vivid memories of kind of being at one with nature. But when you're 3, 4, or 5, you do what feels good. You're not thinking science or anything like that. But cutting through a lot of years, we moved into the suburb and back in the Philly suburbs, and my dad got a different position. Interestingly, I found my love, or at least my solace, around another creek. We called it Caracung, which is the Lenape name for Cobb's Creek. And so growing up in the suburbs, I started getting into photography at an early age. And where was I mostly? I found myself at the creek. I also developed a love for like infrastructure for some reason too. I would take pictures of the Norristown High Speed Line trolleys and stuff that passed by. So here I am, like growing up. I'm the product of a family where my dad was the first person to go to college, and he grew up poor. And so he meant well, and he would say, like, when it came time to look at colleges, you want to take care of your family, do business and law. And so not really thinking more than, what my father was saying. He was my mentor. I kind of just did that. So my early schooling and middle schooling, ended up taking place around those areas. And I look back sometimes sadly that at Brown, I took like maybe one bio class, and I took cool liberal arts classes there, but Brown had an amazing geology department. Never took a class in it, and there wasn't environmental science per se back when I was in an undergrad. And then so then after that, I realized after a job at a core states bank in Philadelphia that I did not want to be I didn't want to work for people and be in a big company. Mm-hmm. And I had an opportunity to start my own business, which was an executive search firm, Impact Search and Strategies. And I proceeded to run that for a bunch of years. At the same time, I was pursuing it in the evening, the JD and the MBA, and I went through with doing that. But always along the side, I was always out hiking. I was always out exploring. I always felt the best kind of being, by a waterfall, or I always loved water, wetlands, salt marsh, things like that. I never really put 2 and 2 together still, but that's where I would hang out. That's where I would go. So then the thing that, as my career carried forward, I'm a huge believer in, for what kids should do when they grow up is to really try to pursue their passion. I actually think that's a practical I'm not saying it for practical reasons. I think you should live life to its fullest and find what you're passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am coming. I got married, and we had our first kid, Jackson, and Jackson was maybe turning about 1-2 years old, and I've always been a thinker and a journaler. So I'm periodically thinking like, I was not passionate about the executive search business that I was running. It did well and everything for the most part, but it just wasn't my passion. And I remember thinking that I got this 2-year-old, and he's starting to get in that perceptive stage, and there's going to come a time when he's going to say, "Dad, you're telling me that I should be passionate about what I do, and you coming home from work not looking so passionate about what you're doing. What's going on here?" And so, like, not fully knowing what I wanted to do, I just kind of followed my instinct. And so at that time, I'm living in Chestnut Hill, Northwest Philadelphia, and interestingly, with a beautiful acre of wooded land with a pond and trees and all the stuff I like. Again, surrounded by nature, but not necessarily like knowing anything other than I just love it. And so I went back to school. I wasn't that far from Temple Ambler's campus,
Mm-hmm.
and which is to this day this sprawling, beautiful area that has a whole lot of natural land on it. And so not knowing exactly what to do, I started taking. I enrolled in their landscape architecture and horticulture program, and then I got lucky. Maybe I made my own luck, but in a class that I had called Natural and Built Environment, very first semester that I went back, we went on a field trip, and the field trip wasn't even based on restoration, which is a field that I ultimately got into, but we were meeting the director of a nature center in Cobbs Creek, and there's to this day there's a Cobbs Creek Environmental Center that's still there, and we took a little walk, and lo and behold, along our walk we see this construction site, and basically the Cobbs Creek in that area had unearthed like 100-year-old sewer line. And so the Parks Department, or actually probably the Water Department, was doing what they felt they needed to do, which was they needed to move the stream and get it away from. By the way, streams move. It's only humans that pen them in with concrete or granite and turn them into canals. Sure. In effect. So basically, I'm looking at this construction site. The creek is in a pipe away from its old stream bed. I see rocks lying out there. I see soil. I see plants in their little root bags waiting to be planted. And I had this revelation, and I remember like there was an expletive in there. And by this time I'm back at school, and the kids are like, not maybe young enough to be my kid, but I'm a lot older than most of my classmates. And I'm like, holy SH, I just figured out what I want to do. And so, and it occurred to me that, here I'm studying plants and I'm studying design, but I'm someone who really likes to know about everything. I like systems. I like understanding the way things work. Mm-hmm. And I realized that in front of me, if I'm going to understand this concept called restoration, I'm going to have to understand ecology. I'm going to have to understand the way the soils work, the way the groundwater works, the way the surface water works, things like that. So what I did was, having 3 degrees at the time, I didn't necessarily need another one to put on the shelf or whatever you do with your degrees. But I started taking all the classes that Temple had that I thought would help me do what I wanted to do. So I started taking soil science. I took a bunch of high-level geology classes that they had there. I took all the plant science classes I could take that they had. But I continued with design classes. I got into community and regional planning. And so I basically wove together, an array of courses that provided me with the background that I needed. And on top of that, I started doing things on my own. Here I'm an adult, and I'm like, worrying my wife big time that I'm getting out of my old business and I'm back in school full time, as an adult. By this time we had a second kid, Kira. Mm-hmm. So we have 2 kids, and I'm the entrepreneur back in school, middle age, leaving my successful firm with big mortgage and all that kind of thing. And I'm taking these classes, feeling a little guilty, but still loving the classes. And so when I was a year into it and summer rolled around, what did I do? I went to my gardener, Vicky, Green Team Gardeners, I think they were called. And here I am paying like probably close to $100 an hour to my gardener to keep my Chestnut Hill property looking nice and green and pretty. And I said, Vicky, I really want to literally get my hands dirty. Let me work for you for a season. So Vicky hires me for $9 an hour, and I start learning, hands-on gardening and that kind of stuff and doing that. Go back to school in the fall, again, loving the classes, learning also about native plants and native ecosystems on my own because those courses aren't offered. And then I go, the next year, I feel like as an entrepreneur, I have enough under my belt to start my own business. So I start something called Ecosystem Designs, which was me, one-person shop, and I did small scale at the residential level, ecologically informed design and construction of gardens. So I would make people largely on the main line and places like that a pretty garden that had pretty flowers and stuff in it, but at the same time, it managed stormwater more effectively. It provided a home for birds, bees, toads, etc. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for a while, continued on to my school, and then after that, I realized I wanted to do things at a larger scale. And I had known of this company from a prior meeting I had. It was based in Wisconsin called Applied Ecological Services. Mm-hmm. And I had met the owner at a conference that he was leading, well over a year ago. And I remember calling him up, his name's Steve, and saying, "Hey, Steve, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm that weird ecologist lawyer guy that came up to you at your conference a year ago in New Jersey." And he claimed, whether he did or not, he said, "Oh, I remember you." And then we talked, and he goes, "Why don't you come out to Wisconsin?" I said to him, but at the time I said, "I know what you guys are doing in the Midwest, and I don't think a lot of groups are doing ecological restoration that well out in Philadelphia. I have startup experience out the wazoo. Let me talk to you about, bringing something like that to Philly." And so, long story short on that one, I set up Applied Ecological Services East in Conshohocken, and for about 9 years or so, built a whole. I became a principal with AES, Applied Ecological, and basically build up a full service professional services firm where we did, like, relatively speaking, larger scale restoration. We could restore, create wetlands. We did a lot of stream restoration. Mm-hmm. I ran projects where we put in 12,000 trees at Longwood Gardens as part of a restoration project. Mm-hmm. Things like that. My claim, if as far as Philly is concerned, there's a pier that's called Washington Avenue Pier now. It used to be called, and really ought to be called, Pier 53. It's the old immigration pier for Philadelphia. And I led the design and construction of this dilapidated pier and turned it basically into an ecological park that you can go hang out on. And yet there's art features and things, but it's one place in Philadelphia where when you're by the river, you can actually get your hands wet, because a lot of things are built up over the river and you can't go and you can't touch it. So I did stuff like that. And then, getting to more, closer to the present, I did a lot of that. And I've been a lifelong student, and I'm doing these cool restoration jobs. Some of them are getting noticed. It's fun. It's meaningful. But then I'm realizing I'm getting older, and how do I touch the most people when I still realize that we're killing our planet? The trajectory in our planet to this day is unfortunately very, very much downward. It's downward in terms of habitat loss. It's downward in terms of like individual habitat types that are key, like wetlands and forests and things like that. Clean water to drink and use for other purposes. Downward trajectory. It's just and then most importantly to me, the thing that really just hits me right at deep in the heart is we're going through what's called the sixth extinction. And about 5 different times in the history of our planet, their natural causes caused like a mass extinction of species. Mm-hmm. 65 million years ago was the last one. When apparently something like an asteroid or a meteor hit a part of Mexico. Is the speculation on it, but bottom line is, an event happened, dinosaurs got wiped out, and so did a whole lot of other plants and animals.
Mm-hmm.
But each time there was a mass extinction, the Earth did what it's kind of intuitively designed to do. It came back stronger than ever before. It healed itself. And so biodiversity flourished in the next 65 million years after that last mass extinction. But then now here we are in modern times, and now it's not just speculation anymore. Studies have been done, and right now the level of species extinction right now is unlike what it's ever been. And there's these crazy measurements that there's something called a baseline extinction rate, and Duke University, I think, is who put out the most recent publication about it. But it's no one even knows the exact amount of species that are going extinct, because so many things are going extinct that haven't even been named yet. But they're thinking that, like, compared to this baseline rate of extinction, because extinction is a natural thing,
right?
That rate could be somewhere around 1,000 times what the baseline is. And again, it's just a guess by the scientists. But the bottom line is we're losing species unlike we never have before, right. And it's pretty safe to assume that humans are causing that. So that's really what spurred me to say, like, I got to do more than just do individual restoration jobs for places that can pay me. And so again, long story short, because I had been doing a lot of writing, reading, thinking, etc., which culminated in me deciding in 2013 to form what's called the Land Health Institute, which is a nonprofit, and like you said at the beginning, with a goal of really, like, putting nature back and restoring connections. And that means restoring connections. I believe that humans have lost our connection with nature that we came from and we go back to, whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. And so it's all about, how do you get people reconnected with nature so that they understand things, and maybe if they do, they realize that there's a lot more we need to do. But it's also about how do you restore connections between people, and also how do you restore connections even between ecosystems. With something like global warming happening, if right now a lot of species are trying to migrate north, and if you're a hopping toad or a hopping frog, and you feel it's getting too warm for you, and you come in to, basically like a wall, like a suburb or a big development, you literally can't migrate any further and stuff. So connectivity between ecosystems is also important. So that's basically where I am today. And so, like, now I do this, I run my nonprofit. I got out of the AES situation that I was involved in for all those years. I juggled both of them for a while, but I think late 2014 is when I got into the nonprofit full time. Mm-hmm. I had also been doing a lot of teaching because it just interested me in a variety of areas based on my expertise. So it got me into teaching at most of the universities in Philadelphia. And then I settled on this director position of social entrepreneurship, which lets me be my interdisciplinary self with my courses that I'm doing at Drexel as we speak. So that's a background.
No, it's a great background. I love all aspects of the story, especially living down here in Philly, and I definitely sense your passion, and having known you for a while, know how passionate you are about these topics. So going from there, so now leapfrogging, not too far, but let's spend a little time on the Land Health Institute. And sure, you have the the native plant activities, you have sort of the land reclamation work, the watershed. Can you go into each of these? And then I guess, obviously I'm from Philly, you're from Philly. Most people in the U.S. will know a little something about Philadelphia, but people all around the world are going to see this show. I grew up in Philly. I've been here most of my life. I look at the city. We have multiple rivers. We have one of, if not the largest, inner city park still in the world. We have literally, I thought I read something like 15,000 small parks and sort of lots that are sort of empty, where there can be ecosystems reestablished. Can you talk just in general about Philadelphia as a laboratory in this context for you, and why it's good, and then go into each of these different areas that Land Health is working on?
I'll branch back for a second and then get right into the heart of your question, because we do view Philadelphia as a lab, among other things, with 40,000 vacant lots and basically the highest poverty and deep poverty rate of any large city in the United States. So it's an interesting and challenging landscape on which to work. And we do, our work takes us into a lot of, I'm a nature guy, but in Philadelphia, even though we have this big park system, nature still is in patches. And, whereas the urban grid and urban sprawl and suburban sprawl and industrial remnants, that's, the major land types happen to be more of that. Land health has its roots in philosophy. And a few people have stood out in my readings over time. And one that's worth mentioning is a guy named Aldo Leopold, who wrote Sand County Almanac, and which was published in the 40s. But Leopold was the first person to write about something called a land ethic, and he was the first thinker that started saying that we have this obligation to view the land as more than just something to exploit. And but he, in a very important but small chapter in his book, he basically makes the case that land should be treated as simply another member of the community. And we were, here we are, just ripping resources out, losing habitat, and in the 40s there was enough knowledge of what we were doing in the name of, quote, civilization and progress. And so that always really hit me hard and in a good way, and as a lawyer, not practicing, but as somebody who has that background, what does the land have rights and things like that, or questions that I've pondered, and written about, over the years. But a lot of it goes back to this concept that if we would simply treat land the way we would humanely treat each other, or hopefully would humanely treat each other, we'd have a totally different planet here. And so back to that's really my underlying foundation with land health. And so Philadelphia, like I was saying before, it's this landscape that I teach at Drexel, and the kids come to Drexel and they come to places like Penn, and they think that Philadelphia is center city and university city, which right now are doing quite well. But you step aside a mile or two in practically any direction, you find yourself in inner city Philadelphia, and you find a lot of abandoned landscapes. You find a lot of depressed housing. Again, Philadelphia claims it has at least about 40,000 vacant lots. Some of these are tiny, some of these are quite large. And then you also have an interesting landscape, sad but interesting, in that a study was done recently about the health of areas. And I think it was a few charitable trusts that led this study, and there might have been another group that has since. But zip code by zip code, human life expectancy, average life expectancy was measured. And in certain areas that are well-to-do, like, the 19106 is Society Hill, Philadelphia, the life expectancy there on average is about 88 or 89 years old, pretty nice. And but then you go to like a 19123, or you go to some of these areas of Kensington and North Philadelphia, and you have life expectancies that are 68, 69. You have these 20-year disparities between neighborhoods that might be a couple miles apart. And so obviously health is a big part of what's going on here. And so Philadelphia has this pockmarked landscape and or set of landscapes, and it's an like you use the word lab, and it makes for an interesting lab. So what we like to try to do is, one, I talked earlier about the education. So land health, while we do a lot of our work around a native plant nursery that we have in West Philadelphia, we're an environmental education entity that we do a lot of our educating by going out to places rather than you coming into us. There's a lot of environmental centers, and you kind of go there for programming. But, we go out and we interact with communities, we interact with schools. So Philadelphia has 300 and some odd schools and hence schoolyards. 90% of them have no grass, have no fields or anything. They're basically all asphalt.
Right.
So we've gone to a few different schoolyards where we've busted out the asphalt, and then we gave the school and the community something that could double as an outdoor classroom. But we plant it with native plants, and so it becomes this meadow. So we do things like that on some of these impoverished areas. We've taken other vacant sites and again turn them into places that have nature on them, but also have a reason for people to come there, because not everybody agrees that wild nature is a safe or a fun thing, because mostly I think because they just don't know. Our native plant nursery itself is our biggest project, where we have 4 acres of land that we lease from the city. And by the way, if anybody's watching this, you want to help us, a dream I have is to go to the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corp, which is who we lease this from. They can kick us out, anytime. They could say, hey, a Walmart or something wants to use your land, and that's a good industrial use. You guys have a lot of cool things going on here. You're out of here. But in the meantime, we put up 2 greenhouses on this land in the park, the West Parkside section of Philadelphia. It's across the street from Fairmount Park. And not only do we grow plants there, for us, our plant nursery is not necessarily just a nursery unto itself. We do programming there. We bring kids there. We bring adults there. We have a program with a group called Spark, which caters to pretty severely disabled adults. And you want to see people that are kind of cooped up all day, for most of their days, come alive in spirit. They come out 2 days a week to our site and help us water plants, help us up pot the plants, and cook some of we grow vegetables and things like that in raised beds, and they get involved in that. So basically, we do things on our site. We've put more nature back at the site. We're growing nature, but we're also we're growing community, because we invite anybody and everybody from the community to come out. Ira, you and I, have the relationship where I do some things for Friends Select. We had our Friends Select campers. They're going to do it again this summer, but they came out last summer, helped out a little bit, learned about native plants and things like that. So what we do when we ecologically redevelop land or restore it, we don't just leave it as such. In an urban environment, we also try to tie in community activity, and from that community activity, there's a lot of empowerment that happens, but there's also a lot of that people get connected with nature, and they don't even know anybody's connecting them with nature. I'm not a big guy who gets up. I don't like in college or in high school or in anywhere. I don't love to stand up and do lectures. I like to take the kids out. I like to take students out so that they explore and kind of their education is based on their exploration. So we open that up, and all kinds of really cool things happen. Kids writing poetry in their journals as part of our Profess program, for instance, which stands for the program for future environmental scientists and stewards that we do. And other kids, get more interested in environmental science. Other kids learn public speaking skills through a program we have called Philadelphia Watershed Stewards, where we focus on a specific watershed called the Cobbs Creek Watershed, but we're getting kids out and about. They address other groups. They go to they go to something called Coast Day, which is a big river celebration and on the Delaware River, and they stand at a booth that has a little demonstration garden, and they high schoolers, inner city high schoolers, inform the community about what a watershed is and what a healthy river system is, and what does it mean to be a tidal river, and things like that. So that's some of the stuff that we do. So when I look at Philadelphia as this palette of interestingly and positively a bunch of green spaces that are part of the Fairmount Park system, but then on the flip side, a bunch of abandoned spaces. It's we're looking for how do we connect, how do we connect people from all different places in Philadelphia into the parks, but then also how do we use things that might be available in their own neighborhoods so that they can be restored into something that has nature, health associated with it, and possibly also places, to do entrepreneurial local activities that might lead to a little bit of local economy, like growing produce or selling things that the neighborhood might buy.
Right. Yeah, I've always been amazed by the, you said that 40,000 lot figure before, just how many, I know I've seen estimates between how big the urban agricultural community or industry could be in Philadelphia if it was, really sort of done right. And I think you clearly understand it the best, and there's a lot of possibilities there. And then also the what you're saying about connections is so extremely important. We've done previous shows from a much different angle on sort of this importance with the elderly. You were saying, in sort of staying connected, and it's very important as you get older for sort of. And not just connection to other elderly people, but to children and family and so forth, that, you are bringing in, as you're saying, you immerse the elderly in nature and they feel good. You immerse children in nature and, it opens up other parts of their minds and gets them thinking. And I really appreciate it. As you know, my own son took part in your program, and the fact that you are, you're with the school kids, you're with the high school kids, you're teaching your college course, and then you're involved with sort of all other aspects of the community is such an important thing. And I really, I applaud you for that. Obviously nothing confidential here, but what are your sort of future visions here? Going out to, we're almost to 2020 now, where is land health going in terms of 2030 and 2040? What are the sort of the big picture? I know you've talked about, informally with me offline, we've talked about the oceans, but what are some of the big sky things that you hope to do in the coming decades with it?
Well, I'll answer that, and it might be a little bit beyond land health. We definitely have aspirations to make land health more of a known entity. We've been doing some really positive things where and in Philadelphia, in about 4 years, we've established strong relationships with the water department and the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society and places like that. So for a young group, we're kind of known, but I'm impatient. There's still this big disconnect. I take students of all ages to a section of Philadelphia that has the largest, the largest or second largest piece of vacant land. It's called the Logan Triangle. Fascinating story. This a strong middle class neighborhood. In Philadelphia through its history. Philly and other big cities also thought it was progress to take streams. By the way, Philadelphia is loaded with streams. You just don't know it. It's because they 90% of them still flow, but they flow in sewer pipes and empty in the rivers. And those valleys were filled, and housing and other things were put on top of that. Well, the Wingahocken Creek doesn't see the light of day other than a little tiny piece in Germantown. And the Wingahocken Creek flows underneath the Logan community of Philadelphia. And interestingly, in the 1800s, they decided to, like a lot of other creeks, pipe that creek, fill in the valley that was left, and what they used to do that was, they thought it was like killing two birds with one stone. They used a waste product for the fill called coal ash, and when you burn coal, the residue is this very fine, floury substance, not a lot of structure to it, like a clay that might have sand particles in it. It holds together. Coal ash does not. It's very flour-like, and so they filled that valley with coal ash, and then by the mid 1900s. And they put about 1,000 houses over that. They expanded the Logan neighborhood over that valley. So houses started sinking, and continue to have subsidence and that kind of stuff because of the poor structure of what they were built upon. Gas line exploded once or twice. Some people got killed with one of the explosions. And finally, the city did what it has done several times throughout the centuries. It used eminent domain and tossed out 1,000 families, knocked down 1,000 homes, and just basically, made Logan. This happened in the 1980s, and created this thing that's called the Logan Triangle, because if you were up in an airplane and look down, it's a little bit triangular in form, but you have about 40 acres sitting there doing nothing. And so over the last couple of decades, there's been stops and starts on talks. The city's looking to get, basically what they're hoping to get is like a big box developer to come in there, put a supermarket hopefully, and maybe a Target or the Lowe's and that kind of formula that's really a product of the suburbs, in my opinion, not the city. But it's, among other things, whether you think that's a good thing for the neighborhood, which I don't believe that's the best use for a neighborhood, that aside, the only way to get something like that and have it not sink is to sink pilings, like in some cases 50 or 70 feet down to the bedrock, so you can build structure there. And so to me, there's still this disconnect. I look at that area, and you have a park wanting to be a park, and you have 40 acres of open space, and all they're doing is mowing the grass periodically and cleaning out all the mass dumping that takes place there. And so, land health isn't there yet, because I want to be one of the leaders that says, like, is this not an opportunity? Let's just let nature take it back. And you can't, it's true in a city, you can't just let it take it back totally. Put pathways in there. Think about your sight lines, create reasons why people are going to feel safe there. But that kind of stuff it's certainly not the rule, and government doesn't understand things like that. And so, so I'd like to continue to grow to be in a position where things like that start happening regularly. So that's part of it. Another thing, when I mentioned that, first I was doing individually designed gardens, and which was great, and I still think it's a great activity to do. Still do my own. But then I got impatient and thought, hey, I'm feeling my age here. Let me get into larger scale restoration. And then again, I got impatient and I'm feeling my age here. Let me get into teaching, and because if I can spread environmental awareness to people, I might just meet with them for 30 minutes and never see them again, but I might have planted a seed that then goes somewhere. And I think that's as powerful as any restoration project that you can have. And now here I am, again, getting older, thinking like, what do I do? So, I'm, in addition to trying to get a couple things published, which would put some common knowledge out that I don't think is out there in abundance, because otherwise we would be doing things differently. I'm also looking at, I'm starting a company called Put Nature Back, which is a for-profit with a give back model. And I'm hoping that it's going to allow me and the people that are working with me on starting this up, we're going to take 10% of our proceeds, and not 10% of our profits like a lot of firms do. Because profit, what's a profit? It could be, it might not be anything, but to literally build a company around saying that at the start, at least 10% of all our proceeds are going to be used to go in a separate fund and then buy up crummy land, like the vacant land in Philly. But if you go to Akron, Ohio, you can get land really cheap to this day. There's land all across the country. And basically, it's a branding company, and we have this cool logo that we're coming out with. It's based on a scar, and have this hip streetwear and cool products and stuff. And then, but that you buy a shirt from us for $25, you just spent $2.50 is going to go to buy land. And then that land, as we start accumulating funds, we'll buy that land, we'll deed restrict it, and say that this is perpetual natural space. And so if I can build that company the way I hope I can, over time, you make them. So even in the first year, in a year, if we made $1 million in revenue, and I'm just talking revenue, that's $100,000 that you can use to, you know, to buy and restore land.
Right.
And so like so that's a physical way that where I just incorporated, you know, this LLC called Put Nature Back, that I'm looking to add to, you know, directly do something that could lead to accumulating land that's kind of just sitting there. The hope in there is that I'm not the only one that does that. The other philanthropists and other people, whether they want to give to us or they want to or do it on their own, realize that, like, you know, if you have a lot of money, you can go donate it to a university and have a building named after you. And I'm not knocking that. I mean, Drexel's loaded with such buildings.
Right.
You know, the building that's next to mine, I think somebody gave, like, you know, $50 million to get it started. You know what I could do with $50 million if I was going to promise that all I'm going to do is just buy up land that right now is just kind of is viable, and then deed restricted, because that's where you can, over time, you can start thinking about connectivity. At first, I just want to accumulate it, but later on, you're thinking, like, how do I connect this ecosystem with this ecosystem so that the reptiles that are worried about, you know, like warming climates and stuff might be able to get to the other one, and you know, that kind of a thing. So that's a large goal that I have, and I'm also expanding my teaching into different ways where I'm getting more serious about like looking into just even starting my own school. I do a lot of my programs are basically like my programs, and so so I've been talking to some individuals, and we're just thinking on my own. But I really think that land is such a powerful topic that I'm looking to create basically like a school where land is kind of at the core, because you can teach every subject that any school has with land as the focus, but you can blend in your humanities, all your sciences. You can blend in math. So rather than saying, like, you need, like, why is reading, writing, and arithmetic not as, like, if they're important, why is environmental understanding not equally as important? And so, you know, I'm making more progress recently than I have in the past towards looking into ways, you know, to do that. In the meantime, I'm looking to do other creative programming, you know, for other schools that are going to potentially let me create like a school within a school, is the term we've been using with one I've been talking to, so that I have that lab space to do what I want, and it's maybe not going to cause upheaval at the overall school, and it's not going to mess with people who want their kids to go there and get into, you know, they're worried if where college. I don't care about what college somebody gets into, like, you know, I care about what kind of life they have. Right. And so again, education to me is the most powerful tool. I don't really love the way education works from K all the way into college. I think we're just missing opportunities left and right. And then I realized over time that land is as big as anything, because if you don't understand your environment, then you get into situations like we have right now. And if you look at what's happened just in the last 6 or 8 months, we've had like 3, at least in my mind, major reports come out. United Nations released a report about the environment, talked about, you know, what we need to do, where global warming is going, and if we don't slow the warming that's taking place, how it might cause really horrific issues in our lifetime. Like I forget what year it was, but, you know, in 2035 or something like that. If we don't change things fast, that's going to cause issues. Then you had the World Wildlife Fund they issued a big report again, no more than like 6 months ago, and they're talking about their report, I believe, reflected mass extinction. It talked about microplastics. You know, it's not a fun topic to talk about, but if anybody wanted to come and take a stool sample from you or me, there's a reasonably good chance that they're going to find microplastics in us. Which means, like, you know, so now plastics, there's big gyres of plastic, you know, floating in different sections of all the oceans, which everybody, you know, that's making some headlines because you got one the size of Texas or so in the Pacific. But now that plastic's breaking down and it's getting totally into the food chain, and nobody's really even studied what are the impacts of us having, you know, microplastics in our systems. But so World Wildlife Fund, that, you know, that gets reflected in their report, and then the government, you know, itself, you know, several years back, I think it was Obama had initiated a study that happened to come out. Our government, when they released it, I think they did it the day after Thanksgiving or the day after some holiday, so that maybe people didn't see it on the news as much. But the government report that got issued on the state of our planet, same thing. I mean, so you have like three major organizations: our own government, the World Wildlife Fund, which is one of the biggest NGOs around, and then the United Nations, all issuing these reports, and then we don't do anything. You have some great school kids that organized a strike a couple of weeks ago, and with because we're not doing enough. But we're like, I think because we don't have long lifespans, meaning
Right.
We're not going to, if as young as anybody could be, even watching this video, you might think like, oh, in my lifespan, it's not going to get that bad. I'm not going to have to deal with the mess somebody else done. We're making a mess that gets messier and messier and messier. And we're not, like, where's our self-respect here? Do we really want to leave a planet worse off than what we found, and be borrowing from future generations that haven't been born yet? So stuff like that troubles me. Like, I mean, it eats at me.
As it should.
And what are the big ways I can go tackle that? Well, if I can do something that might lead towards revamping education, so that part of education, teaches things like empathy and human kindness and environmental awareness and what our connection is to the environment, and still builds all the 3 R's and STEM and all that kind of other stuff into it, might that not be a more effective and meaningful education? And then dirt on the ground, hands on the ground kind of stuff. If I can create a company that actually makes money, and start a trend of like, wherever possible, getting land, that's the thing. And then another individual who's still alive, who's very prolific with his writing, and he's another person who's kind of an interdisciplinary guy, E.O. Wilson. So he in one of his later books, and I agree with the premise, he's making the statement that if we could get our Earth back to 50% nature, that the planet would have a chance to heal. And that's a long way to go. I wish it could be more, but I would take that gladly right now. And so, how do we start thinking about, how do we take our soybean fields and, again, think about flying over the United States, and you look down at the land masses and you see a lot of green, but it's chemically enhanced soybeans and corn and sorghum and things like that's being grown on what used to be prairies and forests and wetlands and things like that. And so, how do we start doing things that are going to make it be not a cool little story that comes out, hey, they're restoring an old farm field here. But it's like, no, if we mean business about climate change, about healthy water, about the health of our own selves, air quality and things like that, the one thing that really goes very far to fixing all of that is just literally putting back nature. And so, how do you do that? Well, you do it through education. And now I'm just trying to increase land health educates in Philadelphia. I got to get that out more before I get too old. And same thing, we do really cool things on vacant land. I feel really proud about, some meadows I've put into places that used to be just dead zones.
Right.
But how do I now get the thinking out there, so it's not just me, but people are copying what we're doing, and they're saying like, wow, if they did that over here, we could do that here. I got $1 million to donate, rather than doing it to whatever. Maybe I can get it so that some group can turn that $1 million into $1 million worth of wasteland that then gets turned into natural open space land. Right. So that kind of thing. So that's where my head is these days.
No, it's a elegant, beautiful vision, and I really applaud you for that. And it's I definitely agree with everything you say, and I'm behind you that I want this mission to succeed, and it's definitely a wonderful vision. Before we get into sort of the wrap up part of the show, you've mentioned a couple times now about sort of different people that have inspired you and sort of mentored you along the way. At this point in the show, we sort of go into this one other direction, sort of a science fiction-y question, but I'm going to propose that I have built a fully functional time machine, Scott, and I'm going to let you travel in it. You can go anywhere you want. You can go back to the dinosaurs, you can go to the far future, whatever you want to do. You're going to go meet somebody and have a conversation. Who is that person that you've always wanted to meet? And what would you want to talk to them about?
There's a few people that stand out as amazing minds that I'd love to have discussion with. And I also think they would get it. Einstein is one. My daughter Kira is another one. I got to say she's a Renaissance girl, but I can talk to her anytime. But I also, the readings I've done on Darwin, I would, I'd have to like skip. He said it's a time machine, so I guess I can maybe amass a few people. You get Einstein, Darwin, and I just was in Italy and France last week, and in France we went to the chateau where Leonardo da Vinci spent the rest of his life, and these guys are interdisciplinary thinkers and doers, and like da Vinci had all these great inventions and stuff, but he also just like sat out and studied the way water works, and so is like he did things where you look, someone might look at him and say like, wow, you've done all this disparate stuff. And to me, I'm like, well, no, I think that knowledge is really all interrelated. And he was a thinker and yet a doer and an observer and an explorer. And Darwin was similar. Darwin had a lot of senses about, the good and bad of what could happen with ecosystems and evolution. And he was alive at a time when we started doing a number on the planet. But I would probably, I'd like to get, I think I'd like to get in a group with, I would have those guys in there. And then I'd have, is it Locke or whoever the main philosopher whose writings and philosophy are behind what our founding fathers used, for our Declaration is all of Independence, talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And at the same, and then also we, the freedom and capitalism all had their birth, with the birth of the United States. When I believe that if we went back to the 16 and 1700s, that if whatever the population was in the planet, it was a fraction of what it is now. Right. And would our founding fathers have established the Constitution in exactly the same way if they had the time machine that you're talking about and looked forward? And so that goes back to the, this concept of, like if I could be interacting with them and show them where things lead once you get 7 billion people on the planet, and then talk to them about this land that we have. It's 4.5 billion years old. Should land not have, just because somebody has, anyway, how did anybody get land in the first place? Who's to say that this land is, I own it? And when it comes down to it, Philadelphia, New York, places like that, Lenape and other Native Americans or tribes were living here, and then European settlers came in and basically like screwed them out of their land, and then decided, and then they invented something called property ownership, and then they said, I own this property, so that lets me not just do something on the flat part of the land, it lets me extract the resources and then leave the land in any state I as long as I pay my taxes on it, I can do whatever I want with this land. And is that really, is that really true capitalism? Is that free trade with the land? And is that something that the founding fathers would have, if they knew right now that we'd be like, having pharmaceuticals floating in our Delaware River that becomes our drinking water, would they really have would they have agreed with that, or might they have built something into the Constitution that would build in more protections of land? So I would basically be getting a group of thinkers, with some having a nice glass of port or something like that, and kind of be talking talking about the issues. And then but just one other fun thing is, sometimes I think about Steven Spielberg, but I fantasize about what it used to look like before we did a number on this planet. The Schuylkill River is it's Dutch. Kil is Dutch for river or stream. So Schuylkill literally means hidden river.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 1600s, a Dutch explorer was coming up the Delaware and apparently beached himself on the shallow area of what he just thought was like some little maybe stream headed into the Delaware River.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, like it was the mouth of the Schuylkill River, which at that time it was so loaded with like bulrushes, which are these big tall wetland grasses and trees, and like it like a primordial estuary is really what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, and little did they know that 130-mile river lay behind that mouth. And so, yet they called it the hidden river because it was hidden by all this beautiful nature. And Philadelphia has about like 400 acres, if that, of tidal estuary left. Most of it's around the John Hines Wildlife Refuge,
right.
whereas Philadelphia is an estuary. It was like thousands upon thousands of acres of just like flowing wetlands and stuff. And with as green as could be, with sturgeon jumping over each other when they do their spawning and things like that. And I would love to be able to go back in your time machine and be here then, and just sit and just watch. I mean, if Spielberg could ever like do something like, how do you reconstruct really what it looked like and do a movie around that? I'd be the ecological advisor gladly on something like that.
Oh yeah, that would be fascinating.
But you get maybe you get him in the room too. But you get Einstein, Darwin, and a couple thinkers like E.O. Wilson. You get us all in the room. We'd fix our mess here in no time. It's ridiculous that we're in such a state right now, and we know it all, and everybody's even issuing it, and we don't do anything about it. That's kind of, and then I think it was if it was Einstein that said that quote about insanity is just doing something wrong, something isn't right, and you do it again or something like that.
Right.
I mean, we know what's going on, and we're just like shutting our eyes to it. Not cool.
Appreciated, very much appreciated. And as you were going through that list, and you're writing a bell in the back of my head in regard to Da Vinci, because I have a book over here. You might have a copy. It's called Learning from Leonardo, and a large part of it is spent on flow, right? The movement of waters, and as you've been talking about that and the reconnection, I'm saying, hey, he sounds a lot like Leonardo da Vinci, and so very coincidental. Scott, I mean, it's been such a pleasure you joining us today. I'm thrilled by your vision and everything you're doing. For people watching, we will have links to Scott's websites and different projects as well up with the presentation and on the blog. And then there's 15 or so radio stations that will be going live. Scott Quitel, founder of the Land Health Institute, director of social entrepreneurship at Drexel, and now is Put Nature Back. Is that a business operational yet, or that's?
Yeah, we're in our like very early stages, but we've incorporated. We've been in Pennsylvania has something called we're a benefit LLC, so there's something called a B Corp, which is not a legal status, but we actually are taking advantage. There's we're a benefit LLC in Pennsylvania. So, but we're up and running, but just brand new. Excellent.
So everyone will check all those links out. And once again, I appreciate you joining us. And this is a show about ideas and the big picture, and you definitely are full of them. So once again, thank you so much and everything you do, and connecting your mind to to the rest of the world. And that's it's these important connections that we always like to talk about, that are the important connections. Not posting pictures of your cat, but really getting ideas out there and and stimulating other people to think as well. So very much applaud you for everything you're doing. And thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Ira. It was fun.